policing. Why do we have police? Why do you think? I'm going to look for a book answer. Why do you think we have police? Yeah, okay, I like that. What else is another? Anybody else have? Why police? Why do we have them? What's the point?
I mean, it kind of gives you a medium.
Gives you a what?
It gives you a medium at the end of the day to solve issues for.
Oh, okay. So somebody to resolve issues, somebody to turn to. So like, yeah, single point of contact. Is it Scarlett? Is that, yeah. What do you think? I'm having a real hard time hearing you.
Sorry.
All right. Yeah, I like those really good. You kind of stole my thunder a little bit. I feel like I should give you my podium. Yeah.
Also enforces the law.
Enforces the law. Yeah, exactly. We somebody to kind of be the enforcer. For instance, we didn't talk about masks. I think maybe Mr. Sullivan, I didn't quite hear him. Did he touch on masks? Masks are mandatory on campus unless you are up front. And that doesn't mean just me. It means you as well. So if we do an upfront presentation, you are more than welcome to take your mask off. The policy says if you're upfront presenting, like I am now, you can take your mask off. So if we have an opportunity where you come up front and present information, please feel welcome to take that on. But using masks that's a policy. Do you, there was a Dunn, right? Somebody, Mr. Dunn. Opinion question. Do you think that there is a difference if you came in without a mask and I wasn't in class? Do you think that there is any difference in how you would react if Ms. Pendergraph told you you have to wear a mask, or if I came in and told you you have to wear it? Is there any difference in those two scenarios?
With something so simple, no. I think if it was a more severe, like, I don't know.
Give me an example.
I brought a weapon in.
Okay. Well, okay. Why are those two scenarios different?
Just how severe it is for one person. One's a simple task to do, and others a lot more severe.
Why is there a difference between Ms. Pendergraph and me? And I'll be right there.
I guess you're just the authority in here.
Yeah, there is something without coming off as what's the word, big-headed or pompous. There is. Do we all agree that, in a sense, I have a sense of authority in this classroom that is different than Ms. Pendergraft? Right. I would say so. Ms. Edgerton.
And I was also going to say, just because she's a student, like somebody might not take her seriously, but take you to her teacher.
Sure. Yeah, I think that
is different.
That lends itself to that authority, the authority figure.
Right.
Regardless, I'm not a police officer. I'm not, but I have certain authorities. If Ms. Pendergraph told you you had to leave the classroom, there's probably less leverage for her than if I said you need to. I'm probably not going to pick you up and take you out, but I have certain tools with which to ensure that eventually somebody leaves the classroom that maybe aren't as available to others. So there is an enforcement arm. Yes, sir. Oh, I think that's not bad. So yeah, so in this situation, there is an enforcement, as you were saying, it's somebody to enforce the rules. There's a different method of enforcement, a different ability to enforce. And it's like that in society, right? I mean, if somebody passed you on the way to school today and they were speeding, there probably wasn't much you could do about it. But there's something the police can do about it because they're given that authority. But we didn't always have the police. Police were developed, like many things in a developing society. The police were developed.
Mm-hmm.
Who do you think were the first enforcement arms of society? You say people? Yeah, I'll buy that. People. We, as a community, as a society, we policed ourselves. Common law, we use the term English common law. Even before that, but we use a lot of as Americans, a lot of our history comes from England. We have a lot of British history. So, and the olden British times, people would police themselves. They needed representatives. So, let's see if I can. So we had like. There we go. We'll call that 10. Because I don't want to stand up here all day without drawing 10 dots. 10 dots. Each dot represents a family. And neighborhood, essentially. Think about movies like Robin Hood. The folks who just lived out in the woods, in the rural British woods. 10 families get together, they make a community. I don't know if you've done the reading. Anybody know what that term was called? We get 10 families together in a community in the old English time. A tithing. You may have heard that term in church. Where you give 10% of your money to the church. It's a tithe. You're tithing 10%, 10 families. T for tithing. They all come from the same root. A tithing was 10 families got together. The rules would say in those common rules that one person from each family needs to represent that family and get together and be part of this enforcement force. One representative from each of those 10 families, and now you have a group of law enforcers. We didn't call them law enforcers at the time, but those are the rule enforcers. 10 folks. Well, you can't really see it very well. But that is a title. But then we have another one here. Another one here. You get several of those tithings together, now you have more than just a community. You're starting to get something closer to a town. We call that a parish. They call that a parish. Several 10 group families grouped together. So we call that 10 tithings, and you've got a parish. We've heard that term even nowadays. We still use the term parish in Louisiana specifically, maybe some other areas where instead of having counties, they have parishes. Groups of towns put together into a county. It's called a parish. We're going to come a little larger. This here is a parish. But if we had over here another one, just like that, and over here another one, just like that. Anybody have any idea what several parishes were called? A shire. You may have heard that in some of the movies like Robin Hood. A shire is a group of parishes. Which brings us to shire. The term they use for the head enforcer of a shire was a reeve. A reeve. So the head enforcer for the shire was the shire reeve. Shire reeve. Anybody have any idea what that sounds like in today's English? Shire reeve. Exactly. Say that again?
The sheriff.
Sheriff. That is where we get the term sheriff. Well, these folks weren't paid. You weren't necessarily getting, as we have a modern law enforcement organization where tax money is going to pay salaries and benefits and things like that. They're municipal employees or county employees or even state and federal employees. And that time, as a community, when somebody was just tasked with watching over and making sure folks are safe, not even necessarily enforcing laws. I know I said that at the beginning, the representative of 10 families were charged with enforcing laws, but for the most part, enforcing laws meant not so much with the internally, maybe keeping folks in line, but mostly protecting, making sure that group of 10 families was protected. Even today, we have something very similar where it's a volunteer organization in communities where they're solely charged with making sure that community is safe. I'm sorry, what'd you say? Yeah, community watch, neighborhood watch, things like that. I'm not super, I've never been part of a neighborhood watch, but I don't think anybody gets paid to do that. There's no.
No, it's just people that's in your neighborhood that you know that are looking.
Right, you're just keeping out. You keep an eye out. And that's what those initial tithing and parish organizations were. It wasn't until later when the organization started getting bigger that one of the jobs of the Shire Reeve and his representatives, I was gonna say his or her, but in those times it probably was his. It was tax collection. Part of the law said you had to pay taxes. So in doing so, in being a law enforcer, part of that job was to collect the taxes for the king. That is when the beginning of having a benefit, the compensation came in law enforcement. They were allowed to keep just a touch, just a little bit of that tax money. The king would allow them just for their time. From there, as we got into more of a developing country in Britain, we got more organized in the law enforcement. We kind of evolved into the watchman, where again, it's like the tithing where you're keeping watch of your own neighborhood, but there is inside of more of a municipality, more of a urban setting. And you're keeping track of more than just households, you're also keeping track of businesses. From there, we have the first named, or one of the first and most commonly accepted as famous names for a law enforcement organization was the Bow Street Runners. BOW, Bow Street Runners. And what they're known probably most for is the fact that they didn't just watch out for crime and report it like some of the earlier organizations did. The Bow Street Runners were the first organization that we know, one of the first ones that we know of, that actually investigated crimes. So you may see something, that asks you, what was the first known detective agency? The Bow Street Runners. Because they were the first ones that we know of, or one of the first ones that we know of, that actually took crimes that had already occurred and looked into it, tried to figure out who did it. And then we come to Miss Pendergraft and Miss Edgerton's favorite guy, Sir Robert Peel. He is credited with being kind of the father of modern law enforcement. Robert Peel, or if you're homies with him like I am, Bob or Bobby. Anybody know what the slang is for British cops even today? Bobby. That's where that term comes from. So Robert Peel, Bobby. As the father of modern law enforcement, they nicknamed, even today, the modern London Municipal Police Department. Those officers are nicknamed Bobbies, named after Robert Peel. So he decided that we need more organization in the law enforcement occupation, the career. We need to actually start giving these people a professional appearance, professional attitude, and a professional way of just doing business. That law enforcement should be a way of doing business, and they shouldn't just be flying by the seat of their pants. Which brings me to another question. What is more important? I'll give you an opinion here. Is it more important to catch criminals or prevent crime? It sounds similar. Is it better to prevent crime or catch criminals?
Well, if you prevent crime, then you don't really need to catch them. They can commit crime in the first place.
Anybody have anything to add on that? Josh, what do you think?
Preventing is better because the crime's already occurred. Just I thought of this. I think preventing is more important.
Yeah.
Because
Okay.
the crime's already occurred, then oh well. I mean, it'd be great to catch the person that did it, but it'd also be better to just stop it from happening to begin with.
It is great to catch. I agree with both of you guys. It is great to catch criminals. One thing I didn't mention is that I spent 22 years with the Los Angeles Police Department, and I caught a lot of bad guys. As a detective, as an undercover operator, and as patrol, I put a lot of folks in jail, and it was great. It was fun. It was fun to put bad guys in jail. But in order for me to put somebody in jail, what has to happen? What do I put people in jail for? I need evidence. It needs to be a crime, right? There has to be a crime for me to put somebody in jail, in general. Which means that somebody was wronged. You'll learn in intro class and some of the other classes when we talk about definitions of crime. In order for a crime to be definitionally present, somebody has to be wronged, injured, harmed. Sometimes that somebody is society. Most of the time it's a person. A crime against a person. In order for me to arrest a murderer, somebody has to be dead, right? So it's great. It feels really good to put a murderer in jail. But as these two are saying, in order for that to happen, or if we were to prevent that from happening, then that person would still be alive. And that's what Sir Robert Peel was saying. The measure of law enforcement success, I'm paraphrasing, the measure of law enforcement success is not how hard it is that you're trying to stop crime. It's the absence of crime. He said truly successful law enforcement organizations are the ones who have as close to possible a community that is crime-free. That's your successful one. You can have all the really high-speed tactical units and equipment and a really high arrest rate and a really high solve rate for your crimes. That's great. You have a measure of success. But would you rather live in that community that catches all the bad guys, or this community over here who doesn't have crime at all? In theory, probably not going to have a community that has no crime, a utopia.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Yep.
I was gonna say, if the lock up all the bad guys, but that's not gonna prevent from happening.
That brings up a very good point. She said you can lock up all the bad guys, but it's not going to stop crime from happening. Why is that?
Free will, or-
Somebody, nobody's perfect,
right.
from what I'm told. So there's going to be some sort of violation of law, even if you lock up all the bad guys. That is a theory of why we lock up folks, though. The reason why law enforcement puts people in jail, one of the theories of that is to make sure that crime doesn't occur. People would presume that if you lock up all the bad guys, then there won't be any crime, or there'll be less crime. What do you think on that? If you the more bad guys you lock up versus how much crime is in society, is there a proportionality there?
I hate to say that, but my opinion, no matter how much somebody tries to prevent it, there's always gonna be crime. I mean, heck, like in Britain, I think they like ban guns.
For the most part.
You know, there's been people that's been using vehicles as a homicidal weapon.
Knives, a lot of knife attacks in London. A lot of knife homicides in London.
So that just proves that since they banned the guns, like how guns are like gun violence and all that.
Mm-hmm.
When they banned it, that people thought they wouldn't be any violence like that again, but move them along.
Yeah, you can't prevent it just merely by taking away the tool or a tool, right?
Mhm.
There are homicides that occur if you get rid of all the rifles, there's homicides that occur with pistols. Get rid of all the pistols, homicides that occur with knives, exit vehicles. We just had there are more than one, but the news just covered one quite widely in, I believe it was Waukesha, Wisconsin, where the guy went through the parade a month or so ago, maybe 2 months
You
ago.
talking about the guy who went over 6 people?
Yeah, ran over with just a mess of folks at a parade.
And apparently he had a mental illness.
It would appear. It's what they're saying. I think running over 6 people would at least be indicative of mental illness. It's tough. I think, unsubstantiated opinion on my part, I think it's very difficult to kill 6 people without having some sort of indication of mental illness. Take that back. Murder 6 people. There are a ton of folks who've killed 6 people that may not have mental illness. What is there between killing 6 people and murdering 6 people? But I think you can intend to kill 6 people. But yeah, that is a good point because it could have killed 6 people accidentally. You're right. We have things called justifiable homicides, right? There aren't murder, and maybe there's no indication of mental illness if you're involved in 6 incidents wherein you commit justifiable homicide, wartime. I've known in a large municipality, I've known several people who have killed several people. I think the most, close to 10, I think it's probably the most, in a very large municipality where they get into a lot of officer involved shootings, where you kill more than 5 or 6 or 7 folks in a career. It's rare, but I've spoken to them. Was there a hand over here? So Robert Peel came up with that idea, or at least memorialized the idea, that preventing crime is far more important. The absence of crime is far more important than the efforts of crime. He also came up with several other principles in law enforcement, that we should garner community cooperation instead of forcing. Instead of looking at the police as an occupying force, which sometimes happens, especially in a municipality. You look at back in the 90s in Los Angeles, they had something called Operation Hammer, which went into South Los Angeles, and some folks looked at this heavy saturation of visible patrol and arrest every single violation, every single minor violation, arrest them, put them in jail, to do exactly what we were just discussing. The more people you put in jail, the less crime is going to be. That theory. I know we talked about that theory last semester. You may remember what we call that? When you put somebody in jail to make sure that they can't commit any more crime? Incapacitation, exactly. So the theory of incapacitation, wherein you put more folks in jail, Operation Hammer doing just that, saturating South Los Angeles, putting as many cops as you can, putting as many lawbreakers as you can in jail to protect those who aren't breaking the law. How do you think the residents of South Los Angeles viewed that? Or some residents, I can't speak for everyone. How do you think some residents of South Los Angeles viewed a ton of cops in their neighborhood?
Probably as tiring, because they were out there and, they were over for infiltrating.
I didn't hear the very first word you used. You said probably like
Tyranny,
tyrant. Oh, okay.
Because the police are supposed to be for the people.
Everybody you arrest, here's something that I learned. Everybody you arrest is somebody's brother, right? Somebody's
Right.
father, somebody's mother, somebody's daughter. They are somebody to somebody. They may be, and I don't mean this rudely, but they're strangers. I would say they may be nobody to you, but when I say nobody, like they may be a stranger. We have no relationship. Vast majority of the people I arrested, I had no relationship with. So when I say that they're nobody to me, I don't mean I look down on them as they're nobody, but I have no personal relationship. They are nobody to me. But every single person you arrest is somebody to somebody. And if you come into a neighborhood and you just take over as a law enforcement organization, then you can have that viewpoint, that perspective of the community members feeling as though it's an occupying force more than a protective force. Because my brother, my my sister, my aunt, my uncle, they got arrested for this minor little thing. And now you've got this community who's now not even wanting their own police force in that area. Now it's not global, it's not universal, I should say. Not everybody in the community is going to feel that way, but it can be a side effect, an unfortunate, unintended consequence. And that's why one of the principles that Robert Peel talked about was being able to garner cooperation from the community. So if we don't send in an army of officers, how do we garner that cooperation? As a law enforcement organization, if you were in charge of a law enforcement organization, if you're in charge of the operations, in this class is law enforcement operations, Michelle, how do you garner cooperation from the community if you're in charge of a law enforcement organization? What are some of the steps or a step you would take to forge a relationship? Yeah. I'm sorry? Meetings. Why does that? I like that. Why would meetings progress a relationship between the community and law enforcement? There, we could discuss with the community what needs to be done. Now, I'll be right there. I can't speak for rural North Carolina, where folks live. But I will tell you, in my 22 years with the Los Angeles Police Department, I lived in the city of Los Angeles for 3 or 4 years. The whole rest of the time, I didn't live in Los Angeles. I lived in the suburbs and I commuted. How do you think that affected the way I police? How do you think?
You're not used to all the people in Los Angeles. They're all different than what you'd be usually seeing around.
They're not my neighbors, right?
You're right.
If you had something else.
I was gonna say that you didn't know them, so, and you didn't live around them, and so you would have to get to know the neighborhood in order to police them the way that it should be. You have to get to know the neighborhood and the people around you, so you have to show your face, you have to be there.
This idea of community policing that Michelle was talking about, the idea that the community knows what they need. They live there. They know what they need from a police force. Maybe somebody who doesn't even live in the city doesn't know as well the individual needs. Sure, the generic needs. I think we all can come up. We need. If I ask you what does the community need to be safe, you don't need me to tell you what community we're talking about.
Right.
But if we were talking about this classroom, if I were to ask you, what do we need to do to prevent burglaries in a neighborhood? Not tell you what neighborhood. You're going to give me a set of answers. But if I then said, what do we need to prevent this classroom from being burglarized at night? Are your answers going to be different? Yeah. You're going to look at the specific one window that we have, the one door that we have, and be able to give very specific responses on what you think would prevent burglaries in this classroom. And the same thing applies to communities where somebody lives versus somebody comes in and polices. So that's an excellent response, Michelle. The idea that a community knows, and those meetings are going to share that information. Ms. Pendergraft, how else would you, if you were in charge of a law enforcement organization, how would you foster a relationship that garners voluntary cooperation?
Like at school basketball games, or like the carnivals around town, churches.
So the idea of officer friendly, like give them a face.
It's like a stereotype for some people that police officers are not the best people, that they just arrest people. But that's why if you go out into town and you see a police officer, like at an organization or school or something, you might kind of like change your opinion.
So having that opportunity to interact with law enforcement in a capacity that is not negative. I like that idea. Was that a hand?
Yeah, one suggestion I like when you go playing with the community.
Playing with them?
Like, let's say, I've seen stories about how those police officers playing basketball with teenagers.
So similar concept, having interactions that are positive neutral, if not positive. Because it's not, that is inherently positive, I think. And then having them out in the public at the very least is neutral, because they're not at the basketball game to necessarily take someone to jail. And if they go out of their way, then they can turn that neutral into a positive. So having, I've actually discussed this with, as a supervisor in the LAPD and as an officer, I've discussed the concept that almost every one of your contacts as a law enforcement officer is negative with the community. The vast majority of them, they're not all. But you think as a law enforcement officer, there's a couple scenarios. You receive a radio call of something, you respond to that radio call, and you take action. Sometimes you arrest somebody, sometimes you're just there to resolve a problem. But it's a problem. So you're calling the police, you receive a call of a neighbor dispute. Maybe, probably, nobody going to jail in a neighbor dispute. I don't get along with my neighbor, he's being a jerk, so I call the police. That means I'm having a bad day. I'm having a bad day so bad that I had to call the police. So my interaction is inherently negative with the police, regardless if they solved the problem. I had a bad day and I injected the police into that bad situation. So there's a negative connotation of that police contact. Hopefully the police resolve that in a manner that is positive for both folks, but there's some negativity there, yes.
So one thing I had with the playing with the police, it humanizes the police.
Excellent word, yes, humanizes the police, thank you. That is a perfect word for that. Humanizing the police as opposed to this maskless invading force that we talked about. We have radio calls. Sometimes we have what we call observational activities in law enforcement, which means you just drive down the road, you see a law being broken, and you take action. The person that was breaking the law ends up going to jail. Can we all assume that that's probably a negative experience for them? They deserved it, but it's still negative. The connotation with the police is negative. You see, we talked about speeders earlier. Somebody speeding down the road, you pull them over, you give them a ticket. Inherently negative interaction with the police. But if we sprinkle in those positive, or at least neutral positives, we're starting to, we're never going to have more positive contacts. We're starting to have that community connection that Ms. Kay has and Ms. Pendergraft talked about. So you'll see as we go through the book, these different principles that Robert Peel, Bobby talked about that are going to more effectively organize law enforcement in a manner in which the professionals can garner voluntary support, use less force, things like that.